that come up. So feel free to throw them in there, and I will do my best to answer them. And besides from that, yeah, thank you so much. Feeling a lot of gratitude tonight for how many people are showing up. Got 100 folks on the call right now, and that's a pretty clear indication that there are going to be some tasty, yummy meals cooked up in the backcountry this summer. So thanks for being here. And with that, I will pass it off to Aaron to begin the show.
While I'm muted. Perfect. Okay, great. So you guys can all hear me now, right? Thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you, Alexander, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's wild that there's 100 people here, which is great and really, really exciting. We have scheduled about an hour for our little chat tonight, so we're going to hop right into it. Our goal is to be able to give as much of a high level overview with diving into certain specifics as we can about how to effectively plan and cook and prepare meals on a backcountry trip. Oksana is going to be taking questions in the chat as we're talking, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well for questions and or discussions. But please do feel free to ask any and all questions you've got, and we'll address them as they come. Cool. So with that, let's go ahead and quickly go over what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about a few different things. Meal planning is certainly one. Meal prep, the Backcountry Kitchen itself. We're going to touch a little bit on recipes and meal plan. We're not going to dive too deep into recipes, and I think you're going to see why as we go through the meal planning, prep, and kitchen aspect. Our goal here tonight is not to tell you what you need to cook and how you need to pack and what you need to do. Our goal is to allow you to make those decisions yourselves with a really strong bedrock and foundation around how to do those things. We want you to eat the foods that you like, how you like them. So we hope we can talk through all of that together. And of course, as a bonus, how to not get eaten by bears, AKA how to have a clean campsite. We will talk about all those things. So without further ado, we are gonna hop right into it. I'm just checking the participants. Okay, no one else in the waiting room, cool. So quickly overview of who we are. So Alexander and I are brothers and co-founders of The Trip Shed. The Trip Shed is an experienced first outdoor store. So what does that mean? That means that we are focused on providing experiences and adventures to folks across Ontario. Those primarily come in the form of canoe trips. We're also really focused on empowering as many people as we possibly can to get out into nature, whatever that might mean for you, in as an authentic and effective way as you can as well. So we're super focused on education, on empowerment, and of course on adventures, but we are also an outdoor store, so we are a complete gear shop as well. Right now we're exclusively online for the time being, but you can catch us in person, hopefully at a few different spots this coming summer. But we do all those things. So, okay. Oh my God, these are amazing. This is something we hear all the time from people who are eating s'mores for their first time. If you've never had a s'more or a roasted marshmallow, you will, hopefully, this summer. First things first, before we get into meals, before we get into meal planning, we need to talk about the most important thing on any trip, and that's water. We're going to talk about water in a couple of different ways. First, obviously, it's essential. And not only is water essential, but clean water is essential. And that means you have to purify water. So we are looking at the purification of water. Apologies if I'm distracted. I'm letting people into the waiting room. We're talking about the purification of water here. So we need to set a distinction right from the get-go between hiking trips and canoe trips, because the experience of carrying water and carrying food as well is very different on both of them. On a canoe trip, you are always upon water and within water. On a hiking trip, not so much. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you are hiking, you're typically going to want to carry more water with you for longer periods of time. You're going to want to probably do that through some sort of a reservoir system or a bladder on your pack, as opposed to numerous bottles, because that tends to like slosh around and throw you off a little bit if you're hiking. If you're paddling and if you're canoeing, then you can certainly have smaller reservoirs of water with you and purify as you go. We definitely want to keep away from single-use plastic bottles for a number of different reasons, but you can absolutely purify water while you're back there, and you should be all the time. There are a number of different methods for purifying. The cheapest and oldest method is certainly boiling water. The process for boiling water is as follows. And this can all be sent out in some notes afterwards as well. First things first, if the water is cloudy, let it settle and filter it through some sort of a clean cloth or a coffee filter, something to get rid of larger sediments. Bring the water to a rolling boil for at least 1 minute. If you're at higher altitudes, you have to boil it for longer, but here in Ontario, we are not dealing with that at all. But you want it to have a rolling boil for at least 1 minute. That kills all the bacteria. Cryptosporidium and Giardia are the two main ones to focus on here. Giardia is also known as beaver fever. It's not fun. It's a bacteria found in beaver poop. So avoid that. Anyways, boil your water, let it cool, and store it in a clean container, and you're good to drink. Cheap, easy, always there for you if you've got a fire. The next step that you can go through are using tabs or drops. So chemical filtration, you drop a tab in, you wait half an hour, shake up the bottle, and it's clean, it's good to go. Super easy, relatively cheap as well, and you always have it with you. And the third and the more expensive method is using filters. There's different types of filters. One that you see here in this left picture, where you simply scoop water from the lake, screw a filter cap on, and just drink it right away. There are pumps, there are gravity filters, there's a whole bunch of different things. We could spend an hour talking about filters, but we're not going to. Those are the three things. My hope is, and the most important thing when it comes to water and clean water in the backcountry, is redundancy. So don't just bring one filter. You want to bring a filter, you want to bring a couple tabs, ideally, in case that filter breaks. And if all else goes poorly, then you can boil water as well. So that's first things first, clean water at all times, and lots of water as well. Drink a ton of it. As guides, we see people on other trips, because we drink a lot of water on our trips, but we see folks getting dehydrated all the time, and it's not a good time, especially if you're out there late July, August, on the water all day with the sun. Water. Cool. I made that point there, I think. Okay, now we're going to talk about meal planning and how to plan your meals. The same thing that I had mentioned earlier applies here, whether you're on a canoe trip or a hiking trip. Keep that in mind, and I'll talk about why in a second. So you want to know where you're going and for how long. So are you going to a single portage in Algonquin Park, or are you going on a 2-week-long trip in Quetico? Those are two very experiences, obviously, and two different lengths of time. So you really want to obviously keep that in mind when you're packing and how much food you're going to be packing as well. Are you going to be in the backcountry or in the front country? In the front country, it's typically easier to get access to additional food. And when we say front country, let me clarify. When we say front country, we typically refer to like car camping, whereas backcountry is typically hike-in or paddling camping. Are you going on a canoe trip, right? Again, if you're on a canoe trip, you can typically pack a bit more food and you don't need to go fully ultralight. How long are your portages, right? Are you doing 5-kilometer portages every day and you don't want to lug really, really heavy food with you the whole time? Or are there a couple smaller ones? Hiking trips, obviously, you're carrying your food the entire time. So that's really important as well. I mention this because you really want to be able to enjoy yourself. On our canoe trips, we used to do this all the time. We would duct tape pineapples to the front of all of our canoes. on the first day. And on the last day, we had these like incredible, fresh, juicy pineapples. They were very heavy and a pain, but when you're guiding a trip of 16-year-old boys, fresh pineapples is a fun thing, and you can have them for your trip as well, right? And just keep that in mind, is that you're always going to have to carry it, right? So maybe don't bring pineapples on a hiking trip, but canoe trips are a bit easier to do that. You want to think, of course, about how big is the group, right? So of course, if you're packing for a solo trip or a trip with 2 people, is a very different packing system than for 9 people. Do you want to fish while you're out there? If you're fishing for one of the first times, I certainly wouldn't rely on catching fish. They seem to never be in the lakes that you're fishing in, and you want to make sure you have food instead. You want to know how fast you're going, right? Are you planning on there's a trip in Algonquin Park called the Brent Run. If you want to look it up, it's a trip from Canoe Lake all the way up to the Brent store at the very northern point of the park and back. And it's a tradition to try and do it as fast as you can. So on trips like that, you're eating gorp and protein bars the whole time, as opposed to a more leisurely trip. What do you like to eat? Also, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Embrace the foods that you like, right? There's no need to only eat dehydrated meals out in the backcountry. If you want to make butter chicken out there, then I think that's an incredible idea, and it's delicious, and you should do it. We're personally really big fans of fresh food on all of our trips. It depends how long you're out there for, right? There's many variables involved in picking what you're going to eat, how big your appetites are, and things along those lines. Meal prep. Okay, so this is a big one, and I think a very important one as well. And it's not just prepping your meals while you're on site itself, but how do you prep and pack everything well in advance of the trip itself as well. So there's 2 schools of thoughts. This is a beautiful picture of my brother Alexander. Quick side note, this was on a trip. These are all full food barrels that you see here. And this was on a trip that we did for 65 grade 8 students in Frontenac Provincial Park for about a week. Happy to talk about that at any time, but that was food barrels for that trip. So there's 2 schools of thought. For canoe trips, neither one is right. They are very different. One is packed by ingredient, and one is packed by meal. So when I say packed by ingredient, I mean you're going to have 1 bag of ground beef, let's call it, or 1 bag of pasta that's going to be used for 2 different meals, let's say, right? You're going to have a spice bag, you're going to have a bag of sauce, you're going to have all of these different things sort of packed into 1 large bag. It's easier to pack this way, and because you're stuffing a bag full of this 1 single ingredient, and it allows for a bit more variety and the ability to sort of change things up on the fly while you're out there based on what you're feeling. The other way of doing things is through packing every meal with individual ingredients. So if anybody's familiar with some of those like food service boxes, kind of like Good Food or something like that, where they ship you a box and they ship you a meal, and everything is in these tiny little cute little baggies with pre-portioned amounts, that's packing by meal, and that's packing every meal with the individual ingredients. So if tonight you know you're going to be having a stir fry, then you have pre-portioned red pepper, onion, garlic, celery. For your vegetables, you have pre-portioned chicken or tofu if you're for your protein, and you've got a pre-portioned amount of rice. That goes into a little a bigger bag called dinner night 1. So when you get to site that night, all you have to do is pull out that bag and you're good to go. Everything is there. It makes for a really well-oiled eating process. That's what we do for our camping concierge trips. So for some of our trips, we pack food barrels for folks and they take it on their trips with them. So we do the grocery shopping and the meal planning for them. And we do that for that method. We pack it by meal. On the trips that we're guiding, we like to pack things by ingredient because again, it gives that sort of flexibility. You can pull things out and say, yeah, you know, we were planning on having our stir fry tonight, but what we really want is marshmallows and chocolate. So great, we can do that. You know, you can change things up. There's no right way or wrong way. Try both. Packing by meal takes a lot more work upfront, but it's easier once you're on site. Packing by ingredient is the reverse. So I leave that to you and to organize it any way you like. So when you're packing your food itself, now you've got your bags packed, you've got all of your meals in Ziploc bags, and we'll talk about Ziploc bags and bagging in a second. But what are you going to put it in? Well, this is a big debate on how to do it. So there are two primary ways of carrying food. There are plenty of others as well, but you're looking at a food barrel or a Wanigan. A food barrel is what you see in this box. A Wanigan is, imagine a wooden ottoman with a strap attached to your forehead, and you carry it on your back attached to your forehead, if that makes any sense. Look up a Wanigan, you'll be able to see what it's like. It's a wooden box, which is also an excellent method for some to carry and store their food. It allows for much better organizations. It's got drawers and shelves, and it acts as a seat and many different things. It's a bit more expensive than a barrel. You pick up a food barrel with the harness for $130, give or take. A Wanigan is typically a bit more, but up to you. You can rent barrels from a lot of outfitters as well. Neither of them are comfortable at all. They are, especially on the first days of the trip when they are incredibly heavy, but they are one of the best ways, in our opinion, to pack your food, to store your food, to keep food fresh, and to keep food away from animals. We'll talk about that more in just a little bit. So keeping food fresh, that's obviously really important. It's really important for us as well, because we love to have fresh food on trips. That's not just fresh food like stir fry. I like salads on the first night of trips. My wife and I last year on the first night of our trip, we pre-packed a Caesar salad and made a Caesar salad in the backcountry. You can keep many foods fresher for longer if you pack them properly. So typically we talk about here what I refer to as meal estate. So there are many different areas within your food barrel, and some areas are a bit more prone to heat or being smashed than other areas. So meal estate means you want to keep food that should be fresh or food that should be frozen closer to the center of the barrel to be insulated by everything else. So your bag of Gorp, good old raisins and peanuts, can go on the side because that does not need to stay fresh. Your vegetables, your meat, your chicken, your protein, your eggs. Eggs is a different story actually, but things like that should go in the center. Freeze them the night before, and they will likely keep the entire barrel fresh for a day or two. Obviously, the more you open it, the less it'll be fresh. The more it is in the sun, the less fresh or less cold it will be, but that is the primary way of keeping everything in your barrel fresh and cool, so it's good to eat for as long as you can. Double bagging is really important. This is what we're going to talk about for plastic bags and Ziplocs. So nothing in the world is worse than something exploding in your food barrel, or should I say on a canoe trip, nothing's worse than something exploding in your food barrel. So you have your bottle of Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, you put it in your plastic bag, you're great, but obviously as you're packing it, something happened and there's barbecue sauce all over everything. You've only noticed that once you're 20 kilometers into the backcountry. So we are big fans of double bagging everything, so that doesn't happen. But we also make sure that everything gets totally air sealed. So if you don't have an air sealer at home, which you don't need for this, you can put something in a plastic bag, squeeze out most of the air, have a little hole, and then suck out the rest of the air from that, and it will tend to keep things fresher for longer. And that's double bagging. You do that for almost everything. It's very difficult to use that much plastic. It's something that we really struggle with as guides and outfitters, to go through that many plastic bags per trip. We haven't yet found a better way of keeping food fresher for longer, apart from that. If anybody has solutions, we'd love to hear it. We are exploring a number of different materials and products, but right now, for most folks, Ziplocs, plastic bags is the best way to do that. Let's quickly talk about dehydrated meals. So I haven't talked about this yet. It's a big thing for a lot of folks, especially on longer trips. I would say to start introducing dehydrated meals in trips longer than 5 days, I would say. We typically, on trips 4 days, 4 days is sort of actually your limit. 5 days, you're pushing it, is when you want to start introducing those dehydrated meals. So there's two types. There's ready to eat, and there is dehydrating your own. So you ready to eat is quite obvious. It's like you see in that picture over here. It's a dehydrated or freeze-dried meal that you rehydrate in the backcountry by adding boiling water, zipping up the pouch, and letting it sit for however long it tells you on the side of the pack. Cost would typically range between $8 and $12 a meal, I'd say, in most cases, which can be cost prohibitive. So you can certainly dehydrate your own as well. I will say also that they have come a really long way in the last little while, right? If you've tasted dehydrated meals in the past, historically they can be like very, very bland or over salted or taste like mush. Some of the ones that are out there now are incredible. We're big fans of Alpine Air and Backcountry Walk, are both delicious, but there's a bunch of them out there. Mountain House, you've seen those, the wall that Mac or Lionel from. Feel free to try your own and see what you like. If you would like to dehydrate your own, you can either purchase a commercial dehydrator, which will work obviously great, or you can dehydrate your own. You can do it in your oven at home. You will put your oven on a very low setting, keep the oven door propped open a little bit, and have a recirculating fan on there. And over time, typically overnight, in my experience, whatever you have laid out will dehydrate. You can dehydrate just about anything. You can, of course, do vegetables and meats, but you can also do full meals, right? So you can make a pasta at home with a tomato sauce, lay it out on a tray, on a pan, and put that in the oven at a low temp with that door cracked open, and it will dehydrate. You can pack that into a baggie, bring it to the backcountry with you, and you have your own homemade dehydrated meal there. Alexander, did you want to add anything on that? I know you've got a bit of experience dehydrating your own meals as well, specifically.
No, I think you touched it there. Really, with that oven method, a useful way too that I've seen people use the silicone baking sheets is a great way to lay things out and then kind of peel off whatever you're cooking up there. And I'll just stress the point around, like, you can dehydrate anything. You can buy your own fruit, dehydrate that, sauces, pastas, whatever it is. And Franklin, for your question there, what sort of container should you put your own dehydrated meals in? You can definitely use the either plastic bags or some of the silicone bags that were being mentioned in the chat there as well. But keep in mind that if you are using something like that, make sure that it is able to hold hot water as well. So you can do containers, you can bring them in a big mix and sort of portion out per pot as needed. But just bear in mind that most of them, at least for a hot meal, will require boiling water.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that in a Ziploc or anything. In many cases, you can rehydrate it just in your pot, right? Toss it in with the hot water and keep the lid on there, and you'll be fine, right? The convenience, truthfully, the convenience of doing it in a bag, to be honest, is dehydrated meals are primarily used for alpine environments, typically, where weight is a major factor. So you typically only have the ability to boil water. So the pots you're bringing in an alpine environment are smaller, and you're just boiling water, and you want to pour it in there. It provides for easier cleanup as well. But if you're in a canoe trip or a hiking trip, something a bit more local, and you're not an alpinist, you can certainly rehydrate in your own pot. Just provides a bit more cleaning afterwards. Cool. Okay, carrying on. So cooking and cleaning. So the meals are prepped. You decided what you're going to have. Everything is organized. But now how are you going to cook it and clean it? So there's two ways of cooking. One is via fuel and one is via fire. So we typically recommend you want enough fuel on a trip to boil 1 liter of water per person per meal. What that means is totally up to you based on your stove and your fuel type. So whether you have a MSR Dragonfly or an alcohol stove or something else like that, you check with the manufacturer and see what that boil time looks like. Fuel and then fire. Fire is obvious. You use the fire to cook your food. That can be done directly on the grill. That can be directly in a pot in the fire, or as you can see here in this picture on the right, can literally be right in the fire itself to provide our version of a baking method. We'll talk about what's in that yummy, delicious pot in just a second. With fuel, you of course have to lug it around with you. There are environmental concerns around the use of fuel as well. But for the most part, if you utilize and dispose of your fuel properly, you should be good to go. It's obviously easy. It's great to have fuel for redundancy purposes as well. So remember at the beginning when I was talking about water, it's very nice to have a backup in many cases. It doesn't need to be fuel that you bring for every meal, but it's incredibly important to have some fuel for your trips if it's pouring rain, or if you simply don't want to build a fire to have your coffee in the morning. You can just use your stove to do that as well. The fire option is you, of course, need wood. So when we're on trips, we like to, and this is not a fire building workshop whatsoever, that's for another time, but we like to get plenty of wood. We have a few rules around it though. The first rule is nothing alive, so nothing attached to a tree. We're not chopping down trees. We're not killing any live vegetation to feed our fire. The wood that we are harvesting from the forest is dead. It's on the ground. That's for two reasons. One is that we really like trees and we don't like to kill trees. And two is that dead wood burns really well and really easily. So we use dead wood. We get wood in a few different sizes. We use pinky, thumb, wrist, and thigh. If you can imagine the different sizes of wood that you need to build a good fire and cook something on, that's sort of how we structure it on our trips. And then the last piece about wood that I'll touch on here is don't get too much, but get enough for the next group to build a fire on. We call that courtesy wood. It's really important. It's something that we do on all of our trips. It's something that there's someone who joined the chat recently who was a tripper, who was one of the trippers who trained us when we were younger. His name is Devo McPherson. He's on this call right now. And he's probably one of the ones who taught us about courtesy wood. And courtesy wood, like I said, is leaving enough wood for the next people who arrive at your site. So imagine you're paddling through Algonquin Park, it's pouring rain, you're getting to your site a little bit late at night, you're exhausted, you're hungry, and you're low on fuel, but you know you need to have dinner, you need to build a fire. So getting to a site and arriving to a big, beautiful pile of wood is absolutely incredible feeling. And if you do it, other people will do it for you as well. So make sure you leave a bit of courtesy wood too. Cleaning. Okay, this is super important. And there are there have been many ways of cleaning your dishes in the past, and this is the way that we are officially recommending that people do it now. So a quick note here on soap. So biodegradable camping soap is not really biodegradable, especially not in water. Biodegradable camping soap is designed to be filtered through soil systems before it returns to an underground aquifer or water table. They don't necessarily advertise that because that's a lot of information for a bottle of camp suds, but for the record, washing your dishes directly in the lake is not a good practice for a couple of reasons. One, you're introducing foreign objects to an ecosystem, so that's food for the fish that congregate around certain areas, and then of course the soap as well is not great for the fish or anything else in the lake either. So I will start with that. The process for cleaning is, one, hopefully there is no leftovers, but if there are, you scrape the food off your dishes into your garbage container, or depending on the meal, can potentially go into the fire and just burn off, which is fine by us as well usually. The next step is to boil water to create potable water and hot water the hottest water that you can tolerate sticking your hand into to use for dishwashing. You want to have a basin with you or some sort of a camp sink, add some soap to that. You're then using that to wash your soap. We use a 2 or 3 sink system on our trips usually. One's for washing, one's for rinsing, and the last is typically for sterilizing. Once you have that, you have those clean dishes. Your dishes are cleaned, rinsed, and sterilized. They're set out to dry. Once that's finished, you take the gray water that's in the buckets, you go out into the forest, and you can either do one of 2 things. One is you dig a hole and you pour the water into the hole, and it, like I said, sort of filters through the soil system, and it's a safe way to dispose of your soap and your food scraps. The other way is a sort of scatter method, and you go out 100 feet, 100 meters away from your campsite, into the forest rather, and you just chuck your water into the forest, scattered loosely so as to not concentrate into one area, and that's another relatively safe, considered safe method of disposing your food and your water. I'll pause for a second here and see if there's any questions, Alexander, anything that has come up that we want to chat about.
Nothing that nothing in the chat that has not already been addressed. Barb has a question on what we use for the sterilizing step.
Mm-hmm. You can use a little bit of diluted bleach or chlorine. Is typically fine. Yeah.
And the fuel ratio, was that mentioned earlier?
So the ratio for it's not necessarily a fuel ratio, rather it's a liter of boiling water per person. The fuel ratio itself will be determined by the fuel that you use. So I would just say if you use, Optimus, Primus, MSR, sort of 3 big fuel companies, just check their sites. They'll tell you exactly what that ratio would be. But the ratio that we referred to was you need as much fuel to boil 1 liter of water per person per meal. That's the math.
There's another question here about using your dishwater to put out your campfire. I would say no to that for a couple of reasons. One, depending on where the campfire is located, it might be a bit close to the shoreline, and that water would likely seep into the shoreline quicker than if you were to walk into the woods. As well, now your fire pit stinks of food. So whether you're taking off from the site or you're heading to bed, your fire pit has now become a hot spot for any other critters or animals to come sniff around and check it out. So definitely not putting out the fire with the food.
Mm-hmm. I would also say, just as something that happened last year, only put wood in the fire. There was a really scary incident that took place last year that you may have heard of at a provincial park, where somebody had buried a propane canister in a fire pit after they were leaving for whatever reason. And the next group came, built a fire in the fire pit. They didn't think to dig into the fire pit, and their propane canister exploded, and there were some very serious injuries that took place at this park. So yeah, try and make sure to only put wood in your pit.
Lita, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Why do we sterilize the dishes? Is that for Giardia? Sort of. It's for anything that, 9 times out of 10, the water you're rinsing your dishes with likely doesn't have something that can make you sick. But for that 1 time out of 10 that it could, that extra step of sterilization will save you a whole lot of a pain in the butt down the line. So, it's better to be safe than sorry, especially if you're out for, a bit of a longer time when you really want to make sure that nothing comes up that, would derail your experience.
Mm. And Chris, thanks for pulling that up. So for reference, because it's been asked a couple times, the small MSR canisters of fuel, the 4-ounce canisters, usually yield about 20, we call it 21 liter boils. That depends on the wind and the temperature a little bit. So if you have a thing of fuel, it should last you 2 trips, 2 like 3-day trips, 3-day trips, but you want to make sure that you have a full one with you there as well. Cool. Thanks, everyone. The great debate. Okay, so what to do with your food at night? This is something that many people debate for many years, and how you deal with your food and how to not get eaten by bears or have any animals visit your site. I will preface this with any worries here about bears and bear safety. In Ontario, bears are not a huge concern. I'm personally a bit more afraid of moose than I am of bears. That said, we want to always practice bear safety. This picture that you see on the left, if you're ever in Algonquin Park and at the Algonquin Outfitters shop at Oxton Lake, go ahead and take a look at these puppies over here. If a bear wants your food, it's getting your food. One way or the other. It's very, very, very highly unlikely that anything like that is ever going to happen. But keep that in mind. And once you embrace that, maybe you'll, I don't know, just keep that in mind. So depending on the food storage system that you have, may help determine how you store your food. So the way that's I would say commonly used is what's called a barrel hang or a bear hang. And that is, if you can see this little picture over here, you tie a rope around one part of the barrel, typically loop it through the shoulder straps over here with a carabiner. You take the other end and you huck it over a branch that's high up. It's typically going to be 15 to 20 feet minimum off the ground and sturdy enough to hold the branch. You then heave on the live end of the rope with other people helping push the barrel up. The barrel goes up in the air. You typically want the barrel about 4 feet away from the branch and about 10 feet off the ground. That's why I say 15 to 20 foot high branch and 4 feet away from the tree. You take that rope and you should ideally tie it off to another tree, not necessarily the same tree that it's hung from, and that you then have your bear hang. The theory being that animals can't get into your barrel if it's being suspended in midair. I'm more cautious of raccoons and mice or chipmunks than I am of bears. So that should take care of most of them. Another method is a barrel canoe. I never really gotten a straight answer on what a barrel canoe is. When we were younger, we used to simply drag the food barrel off to the side, away from the site, and put a canoe on top of it. Some folks, I think, will put a food barrel in a canoe, tie the canoe up to land, and push the canoe out into the lake. reason being that an animal is not going to swim out into the water and jump in your canoe and take your food there. If it's in a barrel, you're fairly safe. For the record, we would recommend hanging it as an effective method. I'm sure there are plenty of other folks who say that that's ridiculous and absolutely overkill, but we like our food. And I've had it happen where animals get into food and it's not fun. So we like to hang our food and keep it safe. Any questions on hanging food? We toss it in a boat and launch a treasure rock. There you go. That's the bear canoe. Okay, cool. So yeah, plenty of different ways. They all work. Just keep your food safe so you've got it for the next morning. Okay, so now we're getting into a bit of a meal plan. So this was everything as the how sort of so far, and now we're gonna get into the what's. You can do whatever you want, right? This picture here is a picture of a meal that we make on our trips. We make fresh tacos, right? And we can just bring all the ingredients and with fresh guacamole, mind you, and bring all the fresh ingredients and make fresh tacos in the backcountry. You can make whatever you want. You typically want to plan for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and obviously some sort of a dessert. You can make them any way you like, but here are a couple quick examples. So you typically see, and by the way, after this call later on this week, we're going to be sharing a number of sample meals and different recipes and stuff too. There's a ton of really great resources that are out there. We're in the midst of compiling a nice long list of meal plans, including vegetarian and vegan meal plans and meal options as well. But just wanted to give a quick overview of like what this could look like. So for breakfast, you could have eggs and bacon and oatmeal and fruit and or any of the above. For lunch, you typically, wraps are a great thing on trips because they don't smush. If you bring sliced bread, you'll typically find that it like compresses into a little ball at some point on a trip. Wraps are really great because they don't tend to do that. So wraps with salami and tuna or hummus and peanut butter is a great option as well. We bring celery on trips and have celery with peanut butter as a lunch or a snack too. Again, you really just know what you want and you can make it work. There's a couple, best practices like wraps, for example, to maximize space and lower weight as much as you can while you're there. Some dinner options, you could literally do anything you want. Stir fry is a staple on a lot of trips, I feel. You can have burgers, you can make a fresh pasta, you can make a pizza. There are a number of different ways of cooking things in the oven on trips as well. They're called reflector ovens, and they essentially create an oven from one side of the fire pit and reflect the heat to another side where you can bake anything you want, whether it's a pizza or a cake or anything. You can bake that in the backcountry as well. You can also make pan pizzas. Like I said, literally the options are endless. Anything you can make at home, you can make on a trip. And I really implore you and ask everyone to do that. Because for me, one of my favorite things about canoe tripping and camping is the food. And it's not just eating the food, but it's the process of cooking the food and coming up with the recipes and enjoying it out there. The fact of the matter is, no matter what you have, it's going to taste delicious. You can have mac and cheese, just a quick box of mac and cheese, and after a long day paddling and portaging, I promise you it's going to be delicious. So have fun with it and do really whatever you want. Bring snacks. Candy and chocolate for us is essential on trips. Always good to have. Different bars, whether it's Clif bars or any other sort of quick bar, is nice to have. And gorp is really important too. So what is gorp? Gorp is good old raisins and peanuts, aka trail mix. You can make your own. You can go ahead and you can go to Bulk Barn and buy all your individual ingredients and make your own there, or you can buy pre-made gorp as well. Always a very essential piece of a trip. And then of course you have desserts. So the quintessential kidney trip dessert is always s'mores. A s'more, for those of you who may not know, is a marshmallow and a piece of chocolate and 2 graham crackers. The marshmallow is warmed in the fire. I like mine burnt, and then you slide it off to the graham cracker and you have a delicious, gooey, yummy, amazing s'more. You can make cake, like I said, with that oven. You can bring Jiffy Pop. Just make sure that you dispose of it correctly. It's super important. Or you can have melted gorp. If you leave the gorp on the side of your food barrel in the sun, at the end of the day, it'll cake into this melty, gooey, delicious mess. And you'll have that. A dessert that we like to make is called tripping balls. And what tripping balls is essentially you take a pot and you put it on a burner, and into that pot you put a ton of marshmallows to start. That's your base, of course. From the marshmallows, you then add Rice Krispie squares, you add crushed graham crackers, you add brown sugar, and you add chocolate chips. You take all that, you stir it all together, you take it out, you form it into little balls, and you've got tripping balls. But that can be made in any way you like. So this is, again, we're not diving deep into recipes, but a quick overview of like what a meal can look like. You obviously want to go, if you're having eggs and bacon, for example, you have that close to the beginning of the trip so it stays fresher, and you leave oatmeal for later on in the trip. You typically want to try and eat heavier perishable food at the beginning and leave the non-perishable stuff and dry food towards the end of the trip. So here's a quick meal that we whip up on all of our trips. We call this pasta al forno. Alexander and I have an Italian background, and this is a dish that our dad makes for us all the time. It is essentially a layered pasta dish. If you imagine lasagna, but instead of sheets, you're using penne. So it's this delicious, gooey and crispy concoction that you make on the trip. You boil the sauce separately. That can be any sauce you like, and you just make its own separate sauce. And then in a separate pan, you start layering. After you've boiled the pasta, you begin layering your cheesy pasta tiramisu, and you add layers of pasta and sauce and cheese, and pasta and sauce and cheese, and pasta and sauce and cheese. We like to make ours in this way up here, where we throw a lid on it, cover it in hot coals. So you essentially broil it from the top, so you can have this really crispy, delicious mix of crispy, cheesy pasta, which you can see in the bottom over here. One of our favorites. As you can see, it takes about quite a bit of time, but what's the rush, right? We're really not in a rush at all when we're out there. At least we're not. You certainly can if you like to be. But we like to take our time and cook and have a great meal and enjoy ourselves like this while we're out there. So that's just one example. And beverages are incredibly important. Beverages take the form of many different things. You've got adult beverages, what we're referring to here. So we really like bags of wine on our trips for two reasons. One is that there's no glass, and you're not allowed glass in the parks. And two is that it's not heavy and it gets lighter. So feel free to bring your wine if you want with you. Just don't bring any glass. You can bring a baggie like this or a Tetra Pak, and then coffee obviously is incredibly important as well. However you want it. If you need percolated Kopi Luwak in the backcountry, then go for it. You can totally do that. We like to do a pour over, but there are many ways, including just instant coffee with some creamer on it as well. But don't forget about your beverages. Very, very, very important. So with 10 minutes left, I want to leave some time for questions. Last tips that are really important. A clean site equals happy campers. So always want to make sure your site is clean and free of food while you're on it, but especially before you leave it as well. Critters will, as you can see here, always try and get into everything, whether or not there's food. If there is food, they'll try even more, but try and keep a clean site as much as you possibly can. Encourage everyone to be as bold as you can with your meals. Bring whatever you want. You can make and cook anything you like in the backcountry, and it tastes that much better while you're out there. Bring snacks, bring plenty of snacks and have fun with your snacks, and suck that bag. Make sure you get all the air out of the bag so that your food stays longer and you can fit more into your food barrel and nothing pops and you don't have barbecue sauce all over your food barrel on the second day of your trip. And with that, I thank you all for listening to my TED Talk today. I really appreciate you all being here and all the incredible questions that were coming in. But now we're happy to take any other questions before we wrap things up. I will just quickly say, if there are any other questions that you have afterwards, feel free to email them to us. You can email them to us at info@thetripshed.ca. Our email is at the bottom. You can connect with us on Instagram or on Facebook. We will answer any and all questions that you've got there. And also keep an eye out for the slides and recording of this, which will have everything that we talked about as well as the rest of our series. So we have a number of other free workshops just like this with very different topics all around canoe tripping over the next 12 weeks, I believe, Alexander, that's correct. So keep an eye out for that. We can send invitations your way, and if it's something you're interested in, that would be great. And as always, we especially love feedback. So any and all of those things are great. Thank you all once again, and we'll hop into any other questions that we might have. So,
I'll just give a quick note on the upcoming workshops, just a heads up for folks. And yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Aaron, for that excellent job. Next week on Wednesday night, we've got another workshop coming up called Seeing Wider, and that's looking at navigation in the backcountry and also sky reading. So understanding weather systems, cloud systems, and being able to predict weather while you're out there when you don't necessarily have a forecast machine with you. So that's coming up next week with, at least 5 more in the calendar and more to follow after that. With that, why don't we head over to some questions here while we've got a few minutes left. And thank you, everybody, for the gratitude you're sharing. Yeah.
I've got one here. How do you bring eggs? We didn't talk about that. There's a couple ways to bring eggs. You bring liquid eggs. You can buy liquid eggs, right? In like one of those milk cartons, and you can just bring liquid eggs. Those are typically fine. You can also use powdered eggs, which have come a long way. MHO apparently makes really, really good powdered eggs, so you can check those out. Or there's these like silicone egg cartons you can get for like $3 to $5. Pop your eggs in there, and they keep them safe. We sometimes duct tape our eggs to the bottom of the canoe seat. It seems to be a really safe space for eggs. But yeah, you can put them where you like as long as they don't crack.
Tammy, your question of do we store dishes and pots in our bear barrel? It depends on the length of the trip and how full the barrel is. If I'm going on a small trip with a few people and there's space in the barrel, I'll definitely throw my dishes and pots in there. If I'm going on a bigger trip where the barrel is full, I'll typically have a utility pack separate, and that will hold all my pots and pans, all my cookware, my stove, sort of things to make the kitchen functional. Overnight, when we're not on travel days, so long as the dishes and pots are clean as can be, I will usually leave them out either under a tarp or just on the benches, because I'm going to be using them first thing in the morning anyways. But again, that is only if they are spick and span clean.
Mm-hmm. Question on how do you carry the food barrel and all your gear at the same time? So we actually have a separate session on solo trips, specifically this question. You don't need to carry it all at the same time, right? You don't need to carry it once. You can come back and do it multiple times. If you're on a solo trip though, you're probably going to have not a food barrel and a little dry sack or something like that of food that you could hang in a tree. That's what we typically recommend, and that would go in your pack with all your other stuff. But come to the solo workshop and we'll talk more about it then.
Victoria, we don't have a tip jar set up, though I appreciate that thought very much. Feel free if you got something out of this, words of appreciation are fantastic. Support online is great too. And if you feel really inclined to leave a tip, by all means, there are some great organizations doing some awesome work in the conservation space, so you can fire it off to them in our name.
And you put a bag of cracked eggs in the water and store them behind your canoe. So eggs, there's a point mentioned earlier. So eggs are fine. Eggs don't need to be refrigerated, as long as it's not like super, super hot. But eggs that are fresh and have not been refrigerated yet do not need to be refrigerated. So a great thing to do is to buy like organic eggs at your local farmers market and use those. And they're good. They're good for at least a week, I'd say, or a couple of weeks mentioned here, Bill. Yeah, so you're good there if you can do that. If not, you can crack your eggs into a lined Nalgene, so you don't have to scrub it out afterwards. And then definitely keep those cold, for sure. For milk and coffee, powdered stuff works best. I like to use, there's these little Nescafe packets of coffee that come with creamer, sugar, and I think some coffee in it as well. I just like sprinkle a little bit of that into my coffee, and it can be really good. Depends how you like your coffee though. Bulletproof coffee powder, yeah. Coffee made and dry, yeah, for sure. You can use all that.
I think a lot of what I'm seeing coming in right now really speaks to the point that Aaron was talking about, is that like everyone's got different preferences and different sort of systems that they like. Everyone likes their coffee. Unless you take it black, chances are you're pretty specific on how you take it. So figure out what works for you and then use the systems in place that we've kind of talked about this evening to make that work so that you can bring that out. Trips are about doing what we love, where we love them. And if we can, bring more of the things that we enjoy at home, that makes that entire trip a lot more comfortable. So you want bulletproof coffee powder? Great. If you want to throw sawdust in your coffee because that's what you're into, do that too. Just bring it with you in a watertight bag.
It's 8:30 on the dot, and wanting to respect everybody's time. So again, thank you everybody so much for coming. Happy birthday, Chris, most importantly. And if you have to go, feel free to do that. But I want to thank everybody again so much for coming out here and choosing to spend an hour of your evening with us. It really means the world. So thank you. Thank you.
The solo seminar there, Nick, is going to be April 28th. And yes, thank you. If you have any questions, anything else, email us. By all means, follow up at info@thetripshed.ca or fire them off to us on Instagram at thetripshed or on Facebook. We can be reached at all these avenues. It'll either be Aaron or I answering your questions directly. And for some of the questions that were there, as far as spreadsheets, meal planning systems, keep your eyes peeled on the site and on social. We'll have those things updated in the coming weeks with some great resources to use for yourself for your own trips. That was it for this evening. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a really wonderful rest of the night. And with that, we wish you happy trails, and we'll see you with the next one.
Bye, everyone.